Good evening, and welcome back to Real Nightmares and the Mazen. Before we dive into the shadows tonight, I have two quick updates for you. First, if you are a supporter and your birthday is within the next 3 months, please contact me as soon as possible. It's incredibly important. Second, if you've ever had a creepy, inexplicable, or downright terrifying experience and want to share it, I really need your stories. See my email address pinned in the description below and send your stories. But for now, it's time to pack your gear, set up your tents, and let the darkness take over completely. Here are 17 terrifying camping horror stories. Back in 2011, I was part of a close-knit group of friends who had a standing tradition. Every May long weekend, no matter what else was going on in our lives, we went camping at the same spot. It was something we all looked forward to every year. Now, the place itself was beautiful. It sat right on the edge of a massive lake on government land. There was a dam controlling the water levels, and during the Mayong weekend, the lake was usually extremely low. Sometimes so low, you could walk straight across the lake bed. Camping there was unofficial, but tolerated as long as people didn't cause trouble or leave trash. Campsites were spaced far enough apart that you had privacy, but close enough that you could meet others and socialize if you wanted to. Well, that year, our group site was halfway up a small hill. There was one campsite below us and another above us, with dense trees surrounding everything. At night, once the fire died down, it felt incredibly dark. Now the first night passed without incident. We were drinking, laughing, and playing music. And on the second day, the group at the campsite below us arrived. They were loud, but at first we didn't think much of it. We kept drinking throughout the day and well into the night, having ourselves a good old time. But by midnight, things changed. The people below us were completely out of control. They were screaming, blasting music to an absurd volume. And it wasn't just annoying, it was downright aggressive. So our friend Ben finally went down the hill to kindly ask them to turn it down. He returned a few minutes later with blood on his face. They'd punched him. He told us they were almost certainly on drugs, and that instantly killed our vibe. The laughter faded, and everyone was suddenly very aware of just how isolated we all were. I was exhausted and uneasy, so decided to go to bed. But some of my friends stayed up, including Ben, and a couple called Lily and Derek, who had been visiting from another campsite we'd made friends with earlier that day. As I lay in my tent, I could still hear the campsite below us raging, but I forced myself to ignore it. I don't know what time it was when I awoke, but I remember sitting bolt upright in my sleeping bag as screaming ripped through the silence of the night. I ran out of my tent barefoot and disoriented. People were yelling and running. Someone was screaming for someone else to call 911. And one of my friends were clutching their chest, face white with shock. That's when I found out what had happened. After I went to sleep, the group from below decided they weren't done with Ben. On their way up the hill, they crossed paths with Lily and Derek, who were heading back from another campsite. Derek was about the same height as Ben and had similar hair, and in their drugged up state, they apparently assumed Derek must be Ben. They smashed full glass bottles over their heads. Around the same time, 2 or 3 massive men emerged out of the darkness in our campsite. One was holding a paring knife, another a butcher knife. Ben saw the knives and stood up to talk to them and barely got a word out when the man with the paring knife stabbed him straight in the chest. At the same time, people from the campsite above us had noticed what was happening and had started to come down the hill to help. One of them, a guy called Tim, was halfway down when the guy with the butcher knife rushed him and stabbed him in the stomach. And from there, everything dissolved into screaming and chaos. Someone called 911, but we were told the ambulance was over half an hour away. Tim was bleeding heavily. His friends threw him into the back of a car and sped off to meet the ambulance halfway. I'm afraid he wouldn't survive if they waited. Ben was bleeding too, but his wound was less severe. We kept pressure on it, trying to keep him conscious and calm while waiting for help. The attackers vanished back into the darkness, running downhill towards their campsite. And not long after, we heard an engine start. They fled in a Land Rover. My boyfriend at the time and I jumped into his car and drove to the campground entrance to try and flag down a police car. When the officers finally arrived, we were told to stay inside the vehicle. A K9 unit had been released into the woods to track down the men who stabbed our friends. Hours later, we learned they'd been caught. They tried to escape by driving across the exposed lake bed, thinking they could cross it and disappear. But instead, their vehicle got stuck in the mud. They were heavily intoxicated and on a mix of drugs like Ben had suspected earlier. Miraculously, both Ben and Tim survived. Tim lost a dangerous amount of blood and took weeks to recover. Derek and Lily were left with massive goose eggs, and one of them may have suffered a concussion. Everything after that night honestly feels a bit blurred around the edges. It was without question the most terrifying experience of my life. Several of us had to testify in court afterwards, and what started out as a fun camping tradition turned into something out of a nightmare. I still love camping, but I've never returned to that spot. One night in the early 80s, a few friends and I were camping deep in northern Montana, way off an old logging road where no one else was supposed to be. We had been drinking around the fire for a few hours when we heard a voice somewhere in the dark. Several of them, in fact. Now, at first it sounded quite far away. And that was when two older men came wandering right into our campsite. Both of them looked really rough. One of them was wearing a dirty army jacket and kept swigging from a plastic whiskey bottle, while the other wouldn't stop laughing at absolutely nothing. They were clearly wasted. The older one kept asking if we had an extra beer, while the other just stood there staring into the fire with this grin on his face that honestly freaked me out. We kept telling them we were just about to turn in for the night, hoping they'd get the hint and leave. Instead, the guy by the fire started stumbling around, pretending to dance. And then he tripped over one of our coolers and went face first into the ring of rocks around the fire pit. The sound his head made against the stones was sickening. We dragged him back and rolled him over, but blood was already running down the side of his face. Meanwhile, his friend was doubled over, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Then, out of nowhere, he stopped laughing and just said, "Dumb bastard finally did it," before grabbing his whiskey bottle and wandering off into the woods without another word. None of us knew what to do. The injured guy was barely breathing, so we wrapped him in a sleeping bag and stayed up the rest of the night watching him. By sunrise, he was dead. One friend drove down the mountain to find a ranger station while me and another guy stayed behind. About an hour later, an older sheriff showed up alone in this dusty truck. He examined the body before asking us where exactly we'd found the men. We pointed towards the trail. He told us that we needed to pack our things and leave right now. One of my friends asked if they were locals or if he wanted descriptions. And the sheriff just shook his head and said, "You kids don't want to get mixed up in mountain people around here." And that was it. As we were leaving, I looked back once and saw two more trucks pulling into the woods from the opposite direction. None of them said police. And so we followed his advice and left as promptly as possible. Two men rolled right into our campsite late in the afternoon with a trailer full of firewood chained to the back of a rusted-out blue pickup. Now that alone felt weird. Most people buy wood at the entrance or from the camp store. No one drives deep into the campground looking for strangers to sell to. The driver climbed out smiling and asked if we wanted to buy some wood. We respectfully declined, but they didn't leave. Instead, the driver just stood up there staring at us all around the fire like he was sizing us up, while the other guy stayed near the truck just watching. And that's when the driver started getting weirdly friendly. Looks like you're all having a really nice time. Mind if we hang out for a while? The entire group went quiet. One of my friends laughed nervously and said, "No, we're good." And the smile on the guy's face dropped almost instantly. He took a couple of slow steps closer to the fire and kept pushing, saying things like, "Come on now, we're friendly." The second guy still hadn't said a word, but was just leaning against the truck, watching us all with this blank expression that honestly creeped us out more than the talkative one. Another guy in the group finally stood up and said in a more firm voice, "You need to leave." But the driver didn't move. That's when my friend walked up to his tent. And a second later, we heard the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being racked. It was at this moment that both men froze. And for a few moments, no one said anything. All you could hear were the trees moving in the wind. And then the driver slowly backed away, got into his truck, and they drove off without another word. Now, it wouldn't be all great of a story if it ended there, right? Because it didn't. About 20 minutes later, we heard the pickup once more. It kept driving slowly and down the road in front of our side, back and forth, sometimes stopping just long enough for the headlights to shine through the trees directly into the camp before moving off again. Every time it passed, both men would stare into our campsite without saying anything. After the fourth pass, we called the park rangers. The rangers asked if it was a heavily rusted blue pickup, and then if it had a trailer full of wood. When we confirmed both, there was a long pause when they told us to stay at our campsite to keep the fire going, and to not approach if they returned. And within 15 minutes, 2 rangers were there. Later that night, one of them returned and thanked us for calling it in. They'd caught the guys just outside the campground. When we asked what they were wanted for, the rangers hesitated for a moment and then said, "You really don't want to know." None of us asked another question after that, but none of us slept much either. Every sound we heard while trying to sleep to us sounded like they were coming back. We left shortly after the next day, probably best not to get involved in whatever that was. And their appearance really put a damp on our trip. So, as I was growing up, every summer in either July or August, my entire family would gather for 2 straight weeks of camping at White Lake State Park in Tamworth, New Hampshire. It was our tradition, and honestly, some of my best childhood memories came from that place. I remember rollerblading loops around the campground and doing Nerf gun wars until it got dark. Water balloon fights were always popular amongst us. And probably the best of all was staying up way too late with my cousins, as well as the neighboring kids we met on these annual adventures. However, after my grandmother passed away, those big family camping trips slowly stopped. Everyone drifted apart. I guess she was the thing that bound us all together. And as time went on, people got older and life got busy. I regret to say that that tradition faded away. But one of the last summers we were all together, something happened that has stayed with me. So this must have been a little over 10 years ago now. I was 16 at the time. It was around 10 p.m., and my family was gathered around the campfire making s'mores. I glanced down at my cheap little track phone and noticed I had a missed call. So, wanting some privacy, I decided to step away from the group to call a friend back. There was a long, narrow trail that wound between campsites and eventually led uphill to the bathrooms. I wasn't actually heading to the bathroom. I just wanted to find an empty campsite with a picnic table where I could sit and talk without everyone listening in. That side of the campground was mostly vacant that night, so I figured it was a perfect place. As I walked, the sound started to fade behind me. It was noticeably quieter over there, darker too. The only real light came from the bathroom building way up on the hill behind me, casting a faint glow over the empty site. I picked a campsite, sat down at the picnic table, and called my friend back. We had a conversation for roughly 20 minutes, and I was relaxed, absent-mindedly, staring ahead while chatting. But that's when I noticed movement on the road in front of me. A silhouette was walking towards the area where all the empty campsites were. At first I wasn't alarmed. It's not unusual to see people walk at night through empty campgrounds. Hell, I'd just been one of these people. But I will say, they usually did carry a flashlight, which is something this person did not. And seeing as I was on the phone, and as my friend was doing most of the talking at this moment, I watched this person out of curiosity. As the figure got closer, I could tell it was a man. He was tall and a bit heavy-set, wearing what appeared to be a light jacket. As he approached, his pace slowed. Then suddenly he stopped. He was standing in the road, staring directly into the campsite where I was sitting. I don't know if he realized I could see him as clearly as I could, but we were locked into a stare. I could not make out any facial features, but I guessed he was probably in his 30s, maybe 40s. And that's when alarm bells began going off in my head. My mind went completely blank. I stopped listening to my friend on the phone, and my body felt heavy. Every instinct told me that there was something deeply troubling about this situation. And after what felt like an eternity later, the man started moving again, but not normally. He began tiptoeing towards me, placing one foot carefully in front of the other. His posture noticeably changed too. He hunched forward slightly, like he was preparing to lunge. It genuinely looked like he was stalking me. And that's when my freeze responses finally broke. I jumped off the picnic table and bolted through the campsite towards the trail, and I heard him follow behind me. The heavy footsteps were crashing through the leaves, and I could hear the branches snapping. He was running, and he was exceptionally close. The sound of him gaining on me made my heart feel like it was going to explode. I reached the narrow trail just as the footsteps were right behind me, and then I heard a sharp twang of twigs and a loud oof from the man. I can only assume he tripped or stumbled or took a branch to the face. Whatever it was, it slowed him down. But I didn't look back, and I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were made of jelly. And then I burst back into my family's campsite, who were oblivious to what I'd been through, who were just laughing still. I collapsed and began shaking and crying, and told them everything. Their reaction was not what I expected. My aunt said almost casually, "Oh geez, he probably thought he knew you and was just trying to scare you as a joke." My cousin chimed in, "Yay, he probably realized he didn't actually know you and felt stupid, so he stopped." They chuckled. On a camping trip away to a slightly remote campground here in Meghalaya on Valentine's Day, with my sister and my husband's brother. We had to sit on a boat to get to the other side where the camps were. It was across a huge riverbank, which basically meant there were no roads to get to it at all. Aside from us, there were 2 more people camping there, plus the caretaker of the camp. This particular night was very windy, so we ate, had a few drinks, but couldn't enjoy the bonfire outside because of how strong the wind was. As the night rolled by, my husband and his brother went into their tent to sleep, and me and my sister did the same thing. We were both having a conversation inside our tent when we heard someone, or something, throw sand and stones towards our tent on all sides. We listened, and it went on for a few minutes. My sister and I thought my husband and his brother were trying to scare us. But then we came to the realization that we didn't hear their tent opening or their footsteps, and no amount of wind could make stones move in such a manner. So, we were wide awake and scared, thinking that the only thing between us and whatever it was outside was a thin fabric membrane. I called my husband, and he said they were experiencing the same thing as well, sand and stones being thrown at their tent. As soon as they came over to our tent, everything stopped, and we ended up sleeping in the same tent for the rest of the night. Fast forward to the next morning. We woke up and couldn't see anything suspicious until my sister pointed out small footprints in the sand, almost human, like a child circling our tent. There were even clear footprints on our life jackets that were on the ground that the caretaker had given us the day before so that we could go swimming. My husband said they belonged to a group of foxes that maybe wandered and were trying to get some food. I've never seen a fox's footprint, so I tried to pay it no mind. The day ended and we were going back home. Once we settled in, my husband said he wanted to tell me something that would give me goosebumps. He said that the footprints we saw did not belong to a fox, but to a bulong, which is a type of water spirit, dwarf-like, with long hair with the proportions of a child's body. He said he saw one when he was a kid, and that thing has a tendency to live near bodies of water in search for food. If you saw one, you needed to leave it while alone, and it would not harm you. But if you disturbed their routine, it is said they'd drag you to a watery grave. He said before we left, he spoke with the caretaker about the previous night. We had, and the caretaker confirmed his suspicions about the campground having a scary amount of water spirits that if left undisturbed would meant you wouldn't even know they were around. The caretaker said there were no foxes in the area, not even dogs. He just told us that so it would not freak us out for the moment. In my culture, we believe that ancient spirits and deities protect our land, whether it's a mountain or a river. We have been taught to respect nature and to avoid angering any of the spirits. And unfortunately, if it ever happened, there were shamans and spiritual people we would go to get rid of the curse. I spoke to my mother-in-law about the experience we had, and she agreed it was a water spirit. She had seen one too, but that's a story for another day. I'm freaking out right now. It was a surreal moment for me. And to top it all off, my sister heard it and witnessed it too. We weren't drunk or high. We just had a few light beers, and all four of us heard the exact same thing. Safe to say I'm not going to be camping again. During the summer of 2016, when I was 11, I went on a camping trip with my scout group. It was for a week at a campsite about 3 hours away from where I live. It was going pretty good for the first couple of days, and I was having a great time hiking and rock climbing. On the third evening, after a very long and busy day, as we'd been down in the mines, I decided to get an early night at around 10:30 and went to bed in my tent. For some context on how our camp was set up, it was in a field on a hill in a semi-wooded area, with trees on one side and a path on the other. There was a pond at the bottom, and the toilet block was to the left of the pond. There were 2 girls, including myself, and 7 boys. So the tents were set up with one tent of 3 boys on the left, 2 girls in the middle, and the other 4 boys on the right. The mess tent was down the hill, slightly to the left of the last tent, and the campfire was in the middle of that. Anyway, after I went to bed, I set the alarm on my friend's watch. Phones weren't allowed on camp, so she had one of those like satellite watches instead for 7 a.m. the next morning. I fell asleep pretty quickly, so I didn't hear my friend come to bed. I woke up quite suddenly after what felt like hours after I'd fallen asleep needing the toilet. It was still dark out, so I looked at my friend's watch that was in the middle of our beds. It read 3:03 a.m., which is a detail I still remember vividly. I tried to wake my friend up to see if she would come with me, as it was kind of scary, but I couldn't get her to come around. I very reluctantly got out of my tent and walked down the hill to the toilet block. When I got there, I saw 2 of the boys from my group outside the men's room looking kind of scared and whispering. They asked me what I was doing, and I said, going to the toilet. They looked at each other and then at me with a sort of worrisome face and told me they'd wait outside the ladies. I told them there was no need and that I was okay by myself, but they insisted. Sure enough, when I came back out, they were still there with the same scared look on their faces. I asked them what was going on and if they were okay, and they said that they had seen some lumberjack-looking men wielding an axe running off into the woods by our camp. I told them not to scare me, as I was not in the mood, and that if they were really that scared, I would walk them back to their tents. They agreed, and we walked back up the hill. I said goodnight to both of them as I went back to bed. It's important to note they were each from different boys' tents, and I fell asleep again pretty quickly, but awoke bolt upright after what felt like a second later. I was confused to check my friend's watch to see it read 2:58 a.m. I thought I had read it wrong, so rubbed my eyes, but it still read the same, and I watched it tick over to the next minute. I thought I must have had a weird dream that I had woken up from, but that didn't seem right for some reason. So I decided to wake my friend up for comfort. She woke up pretty much instantly this time and asked me what was going on. I told her my weird dream and that something felt off. She told me it was probably nothing and said that I should go back to sleep. After tossing and turning for about half an hour, I finally drifted back off and woke up to the sound of the alarm at 7 a.m. I got dressed quicker than my friends, so I told her that I would see her at the mess tent for breakfast when she was ready. When I walked in, and the leader wasn't there, a few of the boys were. They looked like they were talking about something interesting. So I asked them what it was, and one of them said some weirdo man was wandering around the campsite in the early hours of the morning, going into people's camps, putting out their fires and stealing food. Note: our group of about 15 staying at this campsite, each within our own field to set up in. I looked around dumbfounded, as this was around the same time as I had my dream. I saw the two boys and thought that it might not have been a dream after all, and so started to tell them that they knew about this already, as the three of us were there, and I knew that they had made up the axe part as a means to scare me. They insisted they didn't know anything about it, however, and questioned how I knew that the man that was described as the weirdo had on a flannel shirt, dark wash jeans, light brown hiking boots, and a hat with flaps on. I told them that's exactly how they had described the man to me when we were together, in my dream or not. And again, they told me that they had no idea what I was talking about. And it wasn't until someone from the site's management team came over and talked to us about the man that I started to believe the boys' scary story. When their friends said they had both not moved position at all between falling asleep and waking up. I thought it might have been a big coincidence. Then they started not to believe me and claimed that I probably just overheard a story, and I came into the tent. I told them that I had told the dream to pretty much everyone in full detail when it happened. I ran to my tent, dragged my now very confused friend out into the mess tent, and asked her to tell them exactly what I had told them, about my dream the previous night/M morning, without letting the boys interrupt. When she had finished, we all just sat there in utter shock. I still to this day have absolutely no idea if the whole thing was a dream or something else entirely. I was camping along the Sierra Nevada this weekend, mostly around Alabama hills, and for the most part, it was a fun trip. The scenery that was great, the camping itself was fine, and everything was as it should have been. Well, that night, I was having more trouble sleeping than usual. And around 2 a.m., my partner and I both heard something that sounded like an air raid siren. It was slow and airy and stretched out, and it didn't sound like a sound I'd expect to hear in nature naturally, but also not very mechanical. Right after that, I got hit with this intense feeling of pure dread. It wasn't just a feeling of discomfort, it was far more than that. We were already planning to leave early in the next morning, probably 5 a.m. or so. But after hearing that and feeling the way we did, we decided to call it off early and head back home. Anyway, it wasn't until after I got back that I shared the story did someone send me a link of an alleged Bigfoot howl. And that is exactly what it sounded like. So my question is, Did I hear Bigfoot? And if I did, I think I made the right call of leaving when we did. I was camping solo in East Kooten in British Columbia, kind of close to White Swan Lake. It had been raining all day, and by the time I finally got a fire going, it had taken me about an hour. Everything was soaked, and the wood kept going out. So I was happy to finally have some warmth in a dry spot in which to sit. I was sitting there in front of the fire having a beer. And that is when I heard an ATV coming down the Forest Service road. I looked over in the general direction, and then a grizzly popped its head out of the bush about 100 feet away. I had no idea it was there until that exact moment. 1 second it wasn't there, and the next it was just staring at me. It started walking towards me, and I assumed it was doing that to get away from the ATV noise. It got about 20 feet closer before it actually saw me. That's when I yelled at it, popped the safety off my bear spray, and kind of walked towards it, trying to sound brave and make myself look bigger. But I was definitely more scared than I wanted to show. It looked at me, then over its shoulder towards where the ATV was coming from. I guess it didn't like either option, so it took off running up a ridgeline at speed. It just disappeared into the bush. At its closest, it must have been around 50 feet from me. That night, every time I heard a sound in the bush, I thought it was the grizzly coming back to get me. A delicious human taco in his sleeping bag. I ended up sleeping in my 4E runner that night, curled up with the bear spray beside me. I was camping with some friends at a remote but managed lakeside campground in Oregon. It was out in the middle of nowhere, but still had some basic facilities. So we knew we weren't completely alone. We were sitting by the fire one night drinking beers and just chatting when one of my friends got up and walked over to the edge of camp to take a leak. The next thing we heard him yelling. We all jumped up and looked towards where he was standing, and that's when we saw it. Turns out there was some dude sitting in the woods about 10 feet from our campsite wearing night vision goggles and watching us the entire time. My friend noticed the reflection of the fire in his lenses, which is how he knew someone was there in the first place. The dude took off running the second he was spotted, and my friends tried to chase him down. I was still recovering from knee surgery at the time, so I didn't pursue, but I could hear them crashing through the brush and yelling. They couldn't find him because of the moonless night. It was so dark out that you could barely see your hands in front of your face, and we were dealing with thick trees and underbrush everywhere. They did spot him again further away using flashlights and noticing the reflective glint again, but they lost him when he moved. He just disappeared into the woods. As you can imagine, we did not get a great night of sleep after that, and every time we heard a twig snap or a branch move, we all tensed up and checked around. No one at campsites near us saw him or owned up to it the next day. No one even knew he was there except for us. It's pretty creepy to think about some guy sitting there in the dark, watching us with night vision goggles. And for the most part, we had no idea how utterly perverse. Last summer, I booked a glamping trip in the next county over. The website made it look absolutely beautiful. A campsite of 6 large yurts outside a lovely little village. Coincidentally, I had driven through that village before, as it's close to a very nice historic castle I like to visit occasionally. So we paid our money, and my husband 2 kids, and I pitched up. It was one of the last weekends of summer, and the weather was lovely. The campsite was on a small hill, and the people who owned it lived on top of the hill in their farmhouse. We were checking in on a Sunday for 2 nights, as we were shift workers at the time. We passed other people checking out, and they all looked happy. The owners of the site showed us down to our yard and mentioned that we were the only ones on the site for our stay this time, since it was a Sunday. We were happy with that, because with 2 young kids, it meant they could make noise if they wanted to, and we wouldn't disturb anybody. When she showed us around, she did say the yurt door didn't lock, but none of them did. Which, okay, fine, because you don't really lock a tent, right? The place was in its own mini wooded area, and absolutely beautiful. The owner also mentioned the kids would be safe to wander because they had perimeter fences because of their dogs. The first night was fun. We had a barbecue. The kids played and then went to sleep after about 8. Ithel found it hard to sleep, but I often do when I'm somewhere new. There was only patchy phone coverage, so we read until we fell asleep. The next morning, my husband seemed a bit out of sorts, but I asked him if he was all right, and he said, "Yep, fine." So I chose not to pursue it any further. We went out for the day, had a great time. The whole day was blazing hot, and when we got back, I was washing up after dinner, and the kids were playing when a shadow came over the whole place. I felt eyes on me, and it went really cold. Honestly, it felt like something bad was going to happen. And I felt the dread hit me hard. We'd already paid to stay, but I pulled my husband to one side and said, "I've just have this really bad feeling. I don't know why, but I think we should go now." Now, normally he tried to talk me out of stuff like this, but he didn't. He began gathering the kids together, and I packed our things. We went to the farmhouse where the couple who owned it was sat outside playing with their dogs, and my husband started loading up the car. While I apologized to them and explained we needed to leave because our youngest wasn't feeling all that well, they said how sorry they were about it. And then just as I turned to leave, the owner asked if my husband had been outside the house the night before at around 3 or 4 in the morning. I said no. He hadn't left my side all night, as I would have woken up. He asked if I was sure. By this point, my husband was by my side and answered, no, he hadn't. Why I was asking? Well, according to the guy, the security lights came on and the dog started barking. And when we looked outside, there was a man wandering around, who then turned around and walked back directly towards the yurts. So they assumed it was just my husband. We both said it wasn't and quickly said our goodbyes. I tore out that place in the car. And then about a quarter of a mile down the road, my husband turned to me and said, "You're right. I was quiet this morning. I didn't say anything because I thought you'd take the piss. I wanted to use the bathroom in the wee hours, but as I heard footsteps on the decking outside, not hooves or something on 4 legs, something on 2 legs. I lay there as quiet as possible and hoped the kids wouldn't wake up or something. Nope. No. It still freaks me out whenever I think about it." My wife and I were backcountry camping deep in Redwoods National Park in California, surrounded by massive old-growth trees that blocked out most of the sky. As we went to sleep in our tents that night, a heavy fog rolled in, wrapping everything around in an eerie sort of blanket. I was sleeping soundly at first, but around 3 a.m., woke up with this intense feeling that something was outside our tent. I heard the sound of light, muffled footsteps, like something walking carefully on the wet ground. There was also a quiet hissing or whispering sound, almost like something was muttering to itself, trying to stay hidden but unable to stay completely silent. At first, assuming it was a bear or perhaps a raccoon, I gently up-zipped the rainfly of my tent and looked out. As soon as I opened the tent, the muttering sound stopped completely, like it knew I was looking. The fog was so thick, I could barely see more than 15 feet away. The moon and the night sky weren't visible at all, just an endless wall of gray mist. I turned on my headlamp to get a better look, and in the distance, I saw a faint light turn on as well. At first, I thought it must be another hiker, although we were about 50 miles out in the backcountry, far from any trailhead or other campsite. But it wasn't a normal light. It was a yellowish-orange flickering light, only a couple of feet off the ground, moving in a very weird and unnatural way. I saw the silhouette of a humanoid shape that almost looked like it was beckoning to me, like it was waving me closer. But something about it didn't feel right. I grabbed my knife anyway, got out of my sleeping bag, and walked into the night. As I approached the light, I could see the humanoid shape move more clearly. But as I started to get really unnerved, I didn't move, didn't make any noise, and just stood waiting. Who or what would be out here at 3 a.m., 15 miles into the woods? There was no one else supposed to be out here. I turned once to look back at my tent, and when I did, the light disappeared. The next morning, we searched the area where I saw the light, but couldn't find any tracks or footprints or anything. But the thing that scared me the most is that right near where the light was, there was a 50-foot cliff leading into a stream below. and whatever it was, it didn't fall or leave a trail. It just vanished. Part of me wonders if it was something trying to lure me out there, because had I kept on walking, had I gone straight to the light, I would have fallen to my death before reaching it. I was backpacking with my son in Desolation Wilderness. On the first night, I realized I had forgotten to bring a can of gas for the stove. We ended up eating crackers and other stuff that didn't need to be cooked. I told myself I'd figure something out in the morning. I even considered making a very small fire out of twigs, even though I knew it was against regulation. I was already worried about getting caught, so I figured I'd just deal with cold coffee and make the best of it. The next morning, I was nervous about trying to make a fire, and had already accepted that I was probably going to be drinking the coffee cold. But when I stepped out of the tent, I saw a can of Bane sitting on the ground right next to us. I had no idea where it came from. There were no other campers anywhere near us, not even close. The nearest people had to be at least half a mile away in any direction. So there was no real explanation for how it got there. Later, my son woke up while I was heating the water with the gas. The first thing he said to me was, "Did you get the presents the ghost gave us?" That was one of those moments that makes the whole thing feel even weirder, because he said it so casually, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. The first time my friend Rody and I went to this campsite was sometime around 2019. It had been long enough now that I honestly cannot remember the exact year. We went with two of his friends, Jason and Sarah, and although they were friendly enough, they weren't the best people to camp with. One of the most important rules at the campground was clearly posted everywhere. And that is, of course, that campers were not supposed to keep food inside their tents because of wildlife, especially bears. Oh, and you listening obviously knew that was coming, didn't you? So, you know what's coming now, but we'll steamroll her ahead anyway, like the wildlife did. There were warning signs all over the area explaining the risk. And despite those warnings, Sarah decided to keep food inside their tent. Anyway, that decision led to an unwanted visitor. During the night, Rody woke me up and told me he thought he heard something moving around outside our campsite. Now, I was half asleep at the time and assumed it was just normal forest noises. So I brushed it off and went back to sleep. The next morning, Jason and Sarah told us what had actually happened. They said a black bear had come right up to their tent during the night and had been sniffing around and pawing at the fabric, clearly attracted to the smell of food inside. They stayed quiet at first, hoping the animal would leave on its own, but when it didn't, they became frightened and ran to their truck. Once inside, they started the engine and saw the bear clearly in the headlights, and they described it as a very large black bear, standing only a short distance from their campsite. When Rody and I heard their story, we realized that the bear had most likely walked past our tent before reaching theirs. And we felt extremely fortunate that we had followed the campground rules and stored our food properly. Well, about a year later, in 2021, I returned to the same campsite again with Rody and another friend called Basil. The campground was located deep in the woods in northern Alabama, and it was far enough from any town that you were pretty much completely cut off from the outside world because there was no cell service or internet or any reliable way to contact anyone if something went wrong. Now, at first, the trip was going extremely well. We spent most of our time listening to music and relaxing around the fire. Oh, and painting. We did that a fair bit too. One afternoon around 2 o'clock, Basil and Rody were both inside the tent taking a nap, while I sat alone outside just enjoying the peace of the forest. And that was when I heard something that immediately caught my attention. It was a voice shouting in the distance. The voice yelled the name John several times, repeating it over and over. The message was always the same. "John, help me! John, where are you?" Now, although it was an obvious cry for help, I felt uneasy about investigating it alone in such an isolated place. So I stayed where I was instead of going to look for the source of the noise. Later, when Basil and Rody woke up, I told them exactly what I'd heard. They listened carefully, but didn't have an explanation at the time, and a while later, Basil and I decided to walk down to the river nearby, leaving Rody alone at the campsite. We were gone for roughly 40 minutes. When we returned, Rody appeared visibly shaken, and told us that while we were away, he had heard the exact same voice calling out. A few months later, Rhodey and I decided to visit that campsite again by ourselves. When we arrived, we noticed a tent peg lying on the ground near our site, which isn't that uncommon, since previous campers can sometimes leave small things behind. And we set up our camp as usual and went to sleep. The next morning, however, we found that same tent peg driven deep into the ground in a position that neither of us had placed it. We both attempted to pull it out, but it was embedded so firmly in the soil that we were unable to remove it. And we could not explain how it had ended up there overnight. During that same trip, we also noticed a very large black bird across from our campsite. It appeared to be a crow, but was much larger than any bird we had seen before. I'm approximately 5 feet 4 inches, and the bird seemed unusually tall when it stood on the ground, reaching nearly to my hip. It moved slowly around the opposite campsite, occasionally stopping as if it were to observe us. Although it did not behave aggressively, its size and presence made a strong impression on both of us. On the final day of the visit, both Rhodey and I began to experience a strong and persistent sense of unease. The feeling of anxiety isn't easy to describe. We both had the same impression that staying another night might put us in danger, like we were being warned to stay away. And after talking about it for a while, we decided it was probably best to pack up early. The following year, we returned to that same campground once again, because despite of all the high strangeness, it still remained one of our favorite places to camp, because the location was ultimately very scenic, peaceful, and affordable. And that trip began normally enough. We set up the tent, prepared a campfire, and began to settle in for the night. Or sometime during the night, we were both awoken by a loud sound resembling that of a screaming child. The noise was high-pitched, which immediately caused concern because, as far as we were aware, there were no families or children staying anywhere near us. I stepped out of the tent to investigate and looked around the surrounding area, expecting to see another camper or some sign of human activity. But the campsite was completely empty. As I continued to search for the source of the sound, I looked up and noticed a bird perched in a nearby tree. The bird had light and dark brown coloring and was making a noise that sounded remarkably similar to that of a screaming child. I had never heard a bird produce that type of sound before, and to my knowledge, it is not a species commonly known for mimicking human voices. As you can imagine, the experience left me deeply unsettled. Roll around to 2025. Rhodey and I returned to the same campground once again, and during that visit, we noticed what appeared to be the same large crow in the area. However, instead of feeling threatened or uneasy, we both felt calm in its presence. The bird remained nearby for much of our stay, and the overall feeling we experienced was one of safety rather than danger. We pulled into a state park campground for a couple of nights. There was a line of trees separating our campsite from our neighbors, and our neighbors had a strap hung up between two of the trees with two blackened sausages hanging from hooks. Trying to ignore how weird it was, our neighbors greet us and say, "Don't worry about the sausages. Our buddy got a trail cam, and we're trying to catch raccoons with it," glossing over the fact that this trail cam is pointed right into our campsite. I definitely had to keep this in mind when I got out of my camper to pee in the middle of the night. The sausages were still there in the morning, but I think eventually a ranger came by and told them to cut it out because they disappeared during the day. I didn't like the weird vibes emanating from that spot, so we just ignored their presence for the most part. They were gone for most of the day, but came back to their enormous RV and generator. Right as we were thinking, it would be peacefully quiet for the rest of the evening. The last morning I wake up to the sound of 1,000 crows circling us as I lay there for a while and then peek out to see a dead crow lying right in the same precise spot below where the black sausages had been hanging the day before. Every crow within a 100-mile radius was circling overhead, angrily sing out during this crow funeral. Now I've been on the wrong side of a crow war before and was not too interested in any of them recognizing me. We packed up camp as quickly as possible and then hit the road. For my 15th birthday, my parents agreed to allow me to camp on a barrier island close to my home in Southwest Florida with a group of 6 to 8 of my schoolmates. The day of the campout, my cousin and I took the first boat over with a cooler full of food and drinks in our sleeping bags. We got everything set up and enjoyed swimming in the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Around the time that was the last boat that was due to arrive with our friends aboard, we went up to the docks to greet them. The boat pulled up, and much to our surprise, our friends were not amongst the couple of people who had gotten off the boat. We found out later that they had missed the ferry. This barrier island was called Don Pedro Island, and the only way to get there was by a small ferry boat. There weren't many houses there at the time, so you had a sense of being alone. After we realized that our friends would not be joining us, we went back to swimming, throwing the football around and relaxing on the beach. As day turned into night, we made some sandwiches and enjoyed a picnic dinner under the beach. After a long day spent in the sun, we were tired and decided to get our sleeping area set up. The beach had a rustic pavilion with a couple of bathrooms, and we decided to set up camp there. There weren't any doors or windows in the structure, just the cutouts of where doors and windows should be. We laid there for a while, probably talking about which girls we thought were cute, when we would go to the mall, if we were going to the high school games, etc. It started to get late, but we couldn't get settled because the mosquitoes and noseums, small bitey insects that are relentless in their pursuit of human skin, were eating us alive. We thought that maybe being close to the water might deter the bugs, so we walked down to the edge of the Gulf. We stood there for a few minutes, talking and looking out over the water. And after a few minutes, I saw a white light to the west over the water, moving our way. Of course, we both thought that it was an airplane or a helicopter, but as it got close, it got bigger and bigger. But the thing we noticed was there was no engine noise at all. And then it seemed to come to a complete stop directly in front of us. Our 15-year-old brains had no idea how to process what we were seeing. After maybe a minute or so, it shot off into the south, and in the blink of an eye was gone. It was a very strange experience. After discovering that being close to the water had no effect of keeping the insects away, we decided to get back into our sleeping bags and try to fall asleep. We were talking again about what we'd seen, and also just shooting the breeze, and I could tell that we were both beginning to drift off. Just before I did, I heard a noise that came from the doorway behind us. Our sleeping bags were on either side of that doorway, with our heads right near the opening. As I turned to my cousin and said, "Did you hear that?" But as I turned my peripheral vision, I saw a huge hulking figure in the doorway. The entire upper body was leaning into the doorway between us. And when I spoke, it pulled itself out of the doorway and stood up. I recall very vividly that whatever was there was wide enough to fill the entire frame. And in order to place its upper torso there, it had to stoop down. When it stood, I couldn't even see its head or shoulders. We immediately stood up and tried to sneak off quietly to the pavilion and head to the beach. As we reached the shoreline, we started walking towards the end of the islands where there were homes and looking back to see if we could figure out what we had seen in that doorway. We saw the figure just outside of the woodline, keeping pace with us. When we ran, it ran. When we walked to catch our breath, it walked. When we started to see outside lights of a house ahead, we took off running towards it and didn't stop until we reached it. We turned around to see if whatever it was following us, but saw nothing. We ended up sleeping in beach chairs in someone's house because we were too nervous to knock on their door in the middle of the night and had no other strange activity. I wish now that we'd have checked the tracks in the woods next morning, but at the time that never crossed our minds, sadly. My family and I went camping at the Four Corners for spring break. We set up a little cute campsite near the monument, and at first everything seemed totally normal. It was dry, and there was nothing about the place that felt off when we got there. I went out to explore at around 4:00 p.m. It was still light out, but beginning to get dark. There wasn't really all that much to see beside dry, empty desert, stretching out in every direction. Still, I ended up seeing one thing that stuck with me. I don't know if it was a warning or what, but I saw large tracks that looked like they belonged to a wolf or maybe some huge dog. After that, I started feeling watched. As it got darker, that feeling only intensified, and I started heading back towards camp. But I still feel like something was watching me the whole time. I could see the pop-up in the distance, and I was trying to get back as fast as I could. But then I felt breathing right behind my neck. It was warm. Something was standing right behind me. I didn't turn. I freaked out and ran. I wanted to get back to camp as quickly as I could. Once I got to the pop-up, I slammed the door shut and opened the drawer and grabbed the scissors. I don't know why. I guess I just wanted something in my hand, but nothing ever came inside. I was brave and tried to take a peek out of the small window, even though it was getting quite dim, but couldn't see anything. But I knew something was there. I could feel it glaring at me from outside. My mom and dad came back later from a short hike, and I didn't want to sound crazy. So I kept everything to myself and didn't go outside again until I had to use the bathroom. And even then, my mom went with me. The bathrooms were tiny and nasty, and I didn't like them at all. But after we got back, that feeling of being watched was finally gone. My parents wanted to go to bed early, and I tried to convince them to stay up a little longer, but they said no, I want to sleep. I stayed awake listening to ghost stories on my headphones when I heard this soft noise like sheish. Then it got louder. I did the dumbest thing I could have done. I got outside and used a flashlight. The shushing stopped, but only then did I see this thing. It must have been around 8 feet tall. I was only 13 and not even 5 feet tall myself. Whatever this creature was towered over me. I looked right at it and could see its eyes clearly. They were pitch black, like two empty pools with nothing inside them. And then it moved closer. I could finally see the rest of it. It was a grayish white, very tall and thin with small fingers. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. I couldn't even move. It kept coming closer until it must have been around 7 feet away from me. And then it looked at me and smiled. After that, it transformed into a bear and then ran away. But not on all fours, as it ran like a human would. And that made it even worse. As soon as it was gone, I could move again, and I screamed. My mom came out and saw me standing there, but when I tried to explain to her, she thought I was nuts or lying. That was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I still wonder if that thing can follow people, because I always feel like I'm being watched. I don't know what it was, and I don't know what to do about it. Just that I'm still quite scared of it. I went camping with my girlfriend and another friend this past weekend in the Appalachian Mountains at a well-known lake camping area. We found a place in the back because a lot of spots were already taken. We got there when it was almost dark, set up our tents, and started a small fire to cook hot dogs, and went to sleep after the fire was out at around 10:30 p.m. My girlfriend and I were in one tent, and our friend is in the other tent by themselves. I fell asleep first and then woke up around 12:30 to the sound of some type of animal howling or screaming very loudly in the distance. It wasn't a dog, coyote, bobcat, or owl, but it sounded different. Finally, I fell back asleep. Then I woke up to what I saw was our friend leaving her tent to use the bathroom and walking around outside. I could hear what I thought was someone walking on some of the rocks, and maybe a tent zipper or something, and I fell back asleep. Then I woke up again and thought that it was around 6:30 a.m., due to it looking like there was a little bit of light outside, like the sun was just barely starting to come up. And finally, here's the best part. Around 4:25 a.m., I wake up freaking out, screaming as if I'm being murdered. I have never felt like that before or had this happen before. My feet were touching the end of the tent, and I swear that I felt something touching my feet from outside of it. But I also felt like something was on top of the tent pushing in towards me. I screamed and swung for like 5 seconds, extremely loudly. My girlfriend was then freaked out, and I had to calm her down. She explained she was freaked out by the howling earlier in the night, and she was having strange nightmares and couldn't sleep, because each time she fell back asleep, she returned to that same nightmare. We both agreed now that we had to check on her friend, because she thinks that we probably got murdered. and we sat quietly, seeing if we could hear something or someone walking or breathing near the tent before we exited. When we looked out, it was pitch black. I cut the flashlight on and exited. We checked on her friend, who was okay. At 4:40 a.m., we were packing everything up and left before 5. Our friend never went outside of her tent to pee because she said she was too scared. Then what did I hear? Did something attack me? Super creepy. I will probably never go camping. There is a distinct kind of vulnerability when you're out in the wilderness, surrounded by nothing but towering trees, a dying fire, and a thin sheet of tent fabric separating you from whatever is prowling out there in the dark. The next time you find yourself under the stars and you hear a branch snap just outside your campsite, remember these stories, because sometimes you aren't as alone as you think. If these stories kept you awake, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the Mazen, and turn on notifications so you never miss another descent into the dark. Thank you for listening, and stay safe out there.